The betrayal under the baobab. In the village of Nyando, where the river snaked through the valley and the baobab trees stood tall like ancient spirits, two men, Aching and Wixa, were as close as brothers. From childhood, they had hunted together, shared food, and sat under the great baobab, speaking of their dreams. But all bonds can break, and theirs began to crack the day Amani, the chief's daughter, came of age. Amani was not only beautiful but wise, with a laugh that could soften even the hardest heart. Many men sought her hand, but none more eagerly than Aching. He had loved her for years, watching her from a distance, waiting for the day he could claim her as his wife. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Aching and Wixa sat beneath the baobab, their spears resting at their sides. "I will go to Chief Abesai tomorrow," Aching said. "I will ask for Amani's hand." Wixa was silent for a moment, staring at the horizon. Then he chuckled softly. "Amani is a woman of her own will, my friend. What if she chooses another?" Aching frowned. "She will choose me." But she didn't. A week later, the village was abuzz with news. Amani had chosen Wixa. Aching's heart clenched. He felt as if the river had swallowed him whole. He couldn't believe it. He had told Wixa about his love, yet Wixa had gone behind his back. At the wedding, Aching watched in silence as Amani danced with Wixa, her face glowing with joy. His blood burned with fury. That night, he lay awake, staring at the roof of his hut. The voice of jealousy whispered in his ear, twisting his pain into something darker. Days passed, but Aching could not let it go. Wixa had betrayed him, and betrayal had a price. One morning, Aching invited Wixa to go hunting in the deep forest, far from the village. Wixa, trusting as ever, agreed. They moved through the dense undergrowth, their footsteps quiet, their spears gripped tightly. They had just reached a clearing when Aching stopped. "Look," he said, pointing toward a thicket. "I saw movement there." Wixa turned, scanning the bush. That was when Aching struck. The spear plunged deep into Wixa's back. He gasped, stumbling forward, then fell to his knees. Shock filled his eyes as he turned to face his friend. "Aching, why?" His voice was weak, trembling like the wind in the trees. Aching did not answer. He watched as Wixa fell, his life bleeding into the earth. The forest swallowed the sound of his last breath. When Aching returned to the village, he spun a tale of a lion attack. The people mourned Wixa, but Amani was not convinced. She had seen the change in Aching's eyes, the shadow that lurked behind his silence. That night, Aching lay in his hut, but sleep did not come. Every time he closed his eyes, Wixa was there, standing at the edge of the forest, his eyes full of sorrow. "Aching, why?" The voice echoed in his ears. He sat up, sweat dripping down his back. For weeks, the nightmares did not stop. Every night, Wixa came to him. Sometimes in the forest, sometimes by the river, sometimes in the village square where the people gathered. One night, he saw himself at Wixa's wedding again. But this time, when Amani turned to face him, her face was twisted with pain. "Murderer," she whispered. The entire village turned toward him, their faces dark with anger. He tried to run, but the ground beneath him sank like mud, pulling him under. He woke up gasping. He tried to push it away, to forget, but the weight of his crime pressed down on him like a boulder. He stopped hunting, stopped sitting under the baobab tree, stopped speaking to anyone. He grew thinner, his skin pale, his eyes hollow. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, Aching went to the river. He knelt by the water, splashing his face, hoping to wash away the guilt. But when he looked into the water, Wixa's reflection stared back at him. He stumbled backward, gasping. He had to end this. The next morning, as the village gathered in the chief's compound, Aching stood before them. His voice shook, but he did not stop. "It was not a lion that took Wixa's life," he said. "It was me." Gasps filled the air. Amani dropped the basket she was holding. The chief's eyes darkened with rage. "Why?" Amani asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears streamed down Aching's face. Because I loved you, and he took you away from me. The village elders murmured, some shaking their heads in sorrow, others whispering of punishment. The chief stepped forward, his face hard. You have betrayed not only your friend, but our entire village. You will live with that weight for the rest of your days. Aching was banished. He left the village that night, never to return. But the people of Niando did not forget. And neither did Aching. For the rest of his life, wherever he went, the ghost of Weeksha followed. Every whisper of the wind, every rustling of leaves, every flicker of a shadow in the night, he was there. Aching could never escape. The lesson to be learnt from this story are: 1. Because some betrayals never fade. Some haunt you forever. 2. Jealousy destroys relationships. Aching allowed his jealousy to consume him, leading him to betray his best friend. Instead of accepting Amani's choice with grace, he let resentment turn into hatred. In life, unchecked jealousy can ruin even the strongest bonds. 3. Love cannot be forced. Amani had the right to choose whom she wanted to marry. Aching believed he was entitled to her love, but love is not something one can demand or steal. True love is given freely, not taken by force. 4. Guilt will always find you. No matter how much Aching tried to hide his crime, he could not escape his conscience. This shows that our actions follow us, and guilt has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply we try to bury it. 5. Actions have consequences. Aching lost everything: his friend, his place in the village, and his peace of mind. This reminds us that our actions, especially harmful ones, have lasting consequences that cannot always be undone. 6. Forgiveness and acceptance are better than revenge. Had Aching accepted Amani's decision and moved on, he would not have lost his best friend or his home. In life, learning to accept difficult realities and forgiving others helps us avoid unnecessary suffering.